Today we're going to talk with Cornelia. Cornelia's lived a long, long time in Nipigon. I won't give any ages, but she's Cornelia Smutalo, which is what I know her by, and then Zygmont Newbrand. So I really wanted to talk to Cornelia sort of about her mom and dad coming here from the Ukraine and how they got involved in the Nipigon community and maybe what your dad did for a job, that type of thing. So maybe you can get us back to when they first came to Canada.
Dad came over from Holland. He took Dutch citizenship at that time to come over to Canada, and Mom was waiting for him in Holland. That's where they met. And he started out in Beardmore. He was brought over by his sister Marisha Clark, and he worked a little bit in Beardmore, but Marisha had lost her husband due to a mining accident, and she did not want Dad to work underground. So Dad was not used to the tremendous cold temperatures that Beardmore has and had, and so he froze his feet badly that first year. And then he came to Nipigon because Marisha was living here with Les Clark, and Les had the Texaco bulk station at that time. So anyway, Dad bought a little house. He bought the house from the estate of McCullough's, and it was Y. McCullough. And so he set up there. He was working at that time, I believe, for Clark Motors. He also worked evenings at the Ovilio Hotel. He got to know the Gentile family very well. Joby Gentile is my godfather. And anyway, so he was settled, and he arranged for Mother to come over from Holland, and she came over. And they were married in Toronto on Victoria Day. And Toronto those days was, very British-minded, and the town was decorated. So my mother says she came in, and when she got married, Marisha had set up everything for her, and the city was decorated. There were bands playing, there were parades going on, and it was a very special occasion. Her picture and Dad's picture at the church, Ukrainian Catholic Church, was featured in the Toronto Star. They had a 2-page spread, and I have copies of that at home.
Wow.
Yeah, and so there was an article written up. My aunt elaborated a little bit, but anyway, they ended up in Nipigon, and Mother couldn't believe what Nipigon looked like because she was used to high fashion. She had beautiful clothes, she had high heels, she had nothing that fit Nipigon, and she says it was quite a shock to her. So she had to go and get all these clothes, and I guess Mr. Everett was in business, and the Hudson's Bay was in business, and she says she remembers one time going out fishing with Dad, and she thought it was just going for a little walk down to the river, and he took her to Pike Lake. And she walked out there in high heels because she had no idea how long the trail was. So poor Mom had a lot of adjusting to do.
But Marisha was a dresser too, right?
Yes,
so that would have been their background, I see.
Yes.
That would have been.
Yeah, Mother came from a wealthy estate in the Ukraine, and they lost everything during the war. But her father was a judge, and they had an estate, they had servants, they had a farm, and it was a very good life. My mother was brought up to do embroidery, and she could manage people, but she did learn how to sew and do other useful things. So she carried this over when she came to Nipigon because she became a dressmaker and a pattern maker, and there were a lot of ladies that liked her style of clothing and the way she sewed. So we had a living room that was always messy with threads and patterns and material that she cut up. We got used to it. Iris learned how to sew, and so did I. I did it just for fun. And my sister Iris, she has won awards for her crochet and her knitting. She's very into it. Myself, well, my hands are more suited to fishing and hunting and all that it goes with. So I have a scarf that's that long in places and that wide in others. And so I'm not a very good example, but we do, each of us, what we do best.
Right. So just to clarify now, because Marisha was with Les Clark, and Les was a brother
To
Harold Clark, who owned Clark Motors.
Right, and there was another brother living in Beardmore, and that was Leonard Clark.
Oh.
And he passed away about, I'd say, 7 years ago. And he was the last of the brothers, but he was the most entertaining. He had been a war vet. He had served overseas. And he lived mostly in Auden and Beardmore, and he was a prospector, but he also worked for Abitibi.
Okay, so that's a Clark family, because I didn't know. I just remembered Harold and Les, but I didn't know there was.
Yeah, it was a large family. I think there were 10 or 11 children in the Clark family.
Okay.
But and they were all beautiful, handsome people.
But Clark Motors was very well known here.
Oh, it was
very, very
yes,
well
yes,
known
yes,
for their
yes.
cars here
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
yeah.
I remember Herman buying from them, the people who worked there,
Yes,
and
yes,
that.
yeah.
So then your dad settled here, and then gradually, where did he end up working?
He ended up with St. Lawrence in Brompton, and then it turned into eventually Domtar, and it went all through its different owners. But he retired at age 65. He was working in the stores for all those years, and he had a phenomenal memory. He knew where everything was, and he was quite a character, but he instilled in us a work ethic which you don't see very much of today. When you do a job, you do it well. And, find something that you like to do and stick with it.
Right. That's important today.
Oh, it's very important, but
today.
It's a different mentality today. And it will come around again. Everything comes around in a circle.
Right. So I didn't realize your dad had worked in the stores all that time, so that was a lot of years in the stores, and he saw a lot of changes.
Yes, he did.
At the mill
Yes, he
too.
did.
Yeah.
He saw people coming and going. He formed friendships there, and it was a 8 to 4 job or 8 to 5, however it was.
Right.
There was, but as soon as he got home, the pack sack was out, the fishing rod was out, hop in the car, and away we went. So I spent my youth fishing down at the river, excuse me, or Lake Helen, or Bass Creek, but somewhere close by.
So did your dad build that house then? Is still there?
Yeah, he originally bought the house from McCullough's, which was on top of the hill, and he had that property. And then when I was 6 years old, we moved down to the very bottom of the hill, closest to the bridge, and that property had already been started, but it was supposed to be a truck yard because we didn't have the bypass at that time. And once the bypass was coming in, there were a lot of changes. Dad lost a lot of property due to easements. And in fact, the highway property goes right through the corner of the garage, right through the septic field, and cuts through where the trees are. So he wasn't happy with that, but that's the way it goes. And he did finish constructing the house. He used local tradesmen, and I can remember the basement being poured by a Finn gentleman, and these guys knew their job. And he had some help with other members of the Ukrainian community who were carpenters. So basically, the house was put around us as we were living in it.
Right. Okay. So that's how he ended up being close to the river. He must have definitely picked that area of Nipigon.
He did. He had his eye on it.
Yeah, he did.
He couldn't believe how good the fishing was in the early days when they had the logs running on the river, because there were fish of all descriptions. You could go down at any time, and you would catch fish. as the years went on, 30, 40, 50 years later, you go down the river, you catch nothing.
Yeah.
You know, it's maybe the odd cisco or a whitefish if you're lucky. In season, maybe speckled trout. Yes, they're still there. Rainbow is still there, but it's not like it was in the old days with pike and pickerel.
Right.
And so we ate a lot of fish.
Right. And your mom didn't mind cooking fish?
Well, no, Dad did a lot of cooking. Mother sometimes complained that we got home about 10, 11 o'clock at night, and she'd have to start skinning and gutting. And so then Dad took over the gutting part, but she took care of everything else. So we ate suppers late a lot because we were having fun. My
Right.
sister Iris was not involved in fishing. She had no use for it. And Dad would bribe her with a dime to stay home. And I felt that totally unfair because I went fishing, but I didn't get the dime, you know, and I had to carry the pack sack and the fish which we caught. So she got a dime for staying home, which she wanted to do anyway.
So your dad mostly fished from shore?
He was a
Cornelia.
shore fisherman, yes. He did have a boat 2 or 3 times in his life, but he felt more comfortable from the shore because we could do our 3 or 4 casts and move. 3 or 4 casts and move.
Okay.
And then we could work both sides of the river, and if we didn't catch very much, then we'd go up to Bass Creek on the Nipigon River or out on Lake Helen, and we were guaranteed fish there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know your dad was well known for fish. I took many photos of him with his fish. So you must have a couple of fish stories that you can tell.
Well, I have one. Excuse me. When I was very small, I took my sister Iris, who was maybe 3 years old. I was 20 months older than her. And I took her to the Nipigon River Bridge. And at that time, it was a rickety affair, and there wasn't much for protection for the public when they were walking. So I don't have a memory of it other than what my mother told me. But apparently I had gone to the middle of the bridge with Iris, and we were hanging on and looking down in the water, and she saw that. She must have made a great deal of disturbance, noise, screams, you name it, because I couldn't go on that bridge till one day when I was 13. I could not walk on that bridge. I was so terrified. So Dad and I went fishing one morning, and it was beautiful, and I was singing to myself a tune from the Mikado, and it was just such a glorious day. We walked across the bridge, and then I hung on to him, and I hung on to those little 2x4s that they had as a guardrail, and we walked down by the CP Bridge.
Okay.
And we were fishing from there, and Dad tied into a speckled trout. And I had asked Dad before we left the house if I could bring a net, and he said, no, we won't need it. And I asked him again, I says, well, we should bring a net, because I'd carried everything and it was no big deal. He said no. He was to regret that profoundly. We got down there, and within 20 minutes, he hooked into a speckled trout. And I could see it in the water. And he knew he had something. That water there is really fast, but there's a little pool beside the embankment there that abuts the train bridge, and you could see the speckled trout in there, and the tail on it was that big, and the back on it was that wide, and we were just we couldn't get that fish onto the shore. Dad was afraid of the line breaking. He only had 12-pound test, and he was afraid of that line or the hook snapping, because he told me, go home and get the net. Okay? Cornelia goes home, and she's walking across this bridge like a pussycat, shaking all the way. So I got there, I went in the garage, I grabbed the net, and then I had to come back. And I was taking one step ahead of the other. I wasn't running, I was just crawling. So I got down there. Poor Dad was already sweating. He'd had that fish on for at least 25 minutes. What should have been 10 minutes for me ended up to be a long time. And I put that net in the water, and he's bringing the fish in, and you could see the fish coming in, and the line broke, and the fish got away. He sat down there for half an hour just just breathing. This was an incredible fish. But he had one when he first came to Nipigon. Stan Gordon owned the Nipigon River Motel. And at that time, the Toronto Star was a really big newspaper, but size-wise, Dad picked up a speckled trout off that river, and he brought it home, not knowing really what it was, sent Mother over to see Mr. Gordon so he could identify that fish. In the meantime, he laid the fish out, and the fish, nose to tail, spread across the Toronto Star. And Dad was busy sawing away at it. And Stan Gordon came in, and he just about fainted. He says, "We can't do anything about it now," he says, "but you probably have a record fish right there." Oh. So they were there in the late 40s and the 50s. And maybe the early 60s was the odd one. But after that, 8 or 9 pounds is tops for the Nipigon River now. Right. I haven't heard. And I'm sure I would have, and you would have definitely, if someone picked up something bigger than 10 pounds. Yeah. But we never weighed the fish that he got that time, because it was already cut up, and what did it matter? But Stan had seen that fish on that newspaper. But the one that got away, that was a story I'll never forget.
I guess not.
It was incredible.
Right.
Yeah. Oh. So there were big fish in that river. And we still get them 8, 9 pounds.
And I can't remember, what did he catch? Was an odd fish? Because I remember going.
Oh, there was a pink salmon. He caught a pink salmon.
The
first
before
pink
the salmon.
Yeah.
Right.
And he didn't know what it was, so he went to see a conservation officer. They didn't know what it was, and it was sent for examination down to Southern Ontario, and it was. He was asked to give up the fish. They mounted it, and it's now at the Royal Ontario Museum, somewhere in the basement, I think. And it would be nice to get the fish back for the museum, but I don't know if they ever let their specimens go.
I just remember I went and took a picture of him because it was a special fish that had been caught.
And it was the first one. Nobody knew what it was. And now we have pink salmon. They come back every 4 years or whatever. But these were fish that were stocked stateside, I think. And they just traveled around the lake.
So your dad has lots of fishing experiences for sure. Yes. So how fancy a rod would your dad have had in those days compared?
It was not fancy at all. It was taped up in places. If he broke it, he taped it. It was... mostly his skill, knowing what bait to use and how to present. And again, we had our routine, If we didn't get a hit within 20 minutes, move on. And because speckled trout are territorial, they hang in a place, and this is their area. And they will chase other fish and other speckled trout out of it. So if there's nothing there, then you move on.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. Okay. Anyway, I just know that's what I remember about your dad, Cornelia, is the fishing part of it. And Stan Gordon, too. Oh, yes. Because Stan loved to be down on the river as well.
He was a
and he was a shoreman.
Yeah.
But he was a, what do you call it?
Fly fisherman.
Fly fisherman, right? Yeah. But I remember your dad and him both being well known for their fishing.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll wind up that part. Okay, we're back with Cornelia, and I'm just asking her now to give us a little bit of information about the Ukrainian people that might have been here and some of the activities, plus the starting of the church, which was important.
Yeah. So religion was important to my dad, and it was important to the other Ukrainian families in Nipigon. They did not have a church, so it was determined when they had get-togethers that they would raise money and buy property and build a church, and it would be Ukrainian Catholic. And so I don't know all the ins and outs because I never asked, and we just naturally assumed that it was always there as we were kids. But my dad applied, I guess he had to apply to the bishop, and they bought the property, which was adjacent to the Anglican church at that time.
And you knew that it was the tennis court.
Yes, it was a tennis court. It was nice and flat. It was a beautiful property. And So I believe they must have purchased a little church frame, and then it was brought over and put in, and inside was decorated with icons, and they have the stained glass windows with, I guess it was some sort of transparent tape that they put on. And there were quite a few people in Nipigon who were Ukrainian or Ukrainian Polish or whatever, and some names were on Askavich, and there was Kowalczyshins, there were Zelenis, there were Lasokas, there were Legefalvis, there was Gregorchuk, and there were a lot of people, but they left Nipigon and they moved on. And so eventually there was attrition. People either passed away, moved on to different jobs, moved away to be with their children when they were elderly. And now we have no longer the Ukrainian church. It's been sold, and it's still beautiful inside. It's well maintained by the new owners. And all the decorations and the icons in the church, my mother retrieved. Some of them were given to the bishop, some of them were passed to other members of the Ukrainian community, but what I had, I gave to the new owners of the Ukrainian church, and they're still there.
I just remember I have a couple of old photos because the nuns came in the summertime.
Yes.
And ran, let's say, a summer school or a Bible school or something for children of any religion.
Yeah,
really,
I spent a couple summers like that inside the church upstairs where there was no air conditioning. It was hot. But we had a chance, there were 3 nuns, and we had a chance to learn Ukrainian language and culture. Ooh. And that stood me in good stead. I recall one nun had a hand that was made out of steel. She had lost her hand somehow, and she'd had a false hand, and we were fascinated by this thing, and so we did as best as we could, and it was an experience. Nobody would dare to say no. None of the children, were taking off or playing hooky. You went every day because that's what you were told to do, and we respected our parents in the church, and that's what we did.
So was there a Ukrainian minister, or was it a visiting maybe minister that came?
We had a minister that was based out of Thunder Bay, and he did Geraldton as well as Nipigon. So there was a Ukrainian church in Geraldton.
Oh, okay.
And he was there every Sunday, and I was married in that church. In 1973, that was my first marriage, and we had the church was packed. Natalka Onaskevich was married to Craig Sharp in that church, and I remember singing with the village choristers at that time at her wedding. And
Mrs. Gregorchuk spoke of that. I interviewed her.
Oh, lovely!
And she spoke of going there, going to church.
Yes,
there.
They made their way.
Yes,
she and her husband and their boys, and the church was full, and the singing was wonderful. The singing was what I missed the most.
Right. Would there have been an organ then?
No. This was a cappella.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But everybody knew the songs, the hymns, and another thing that came out of that church group was at Ukrainian Christmas time. And even the Christmas on the December the 25th, we'd go from house to house caroling. And I always looked forward to that, because you'd go into people's homes, Ukrainian or Polish or White Russian, whatever. They would request us to come and sing traditional carols. And, that was wonderful.
English or Ukraine?
Both.
In both?
Yeah, mostly in Ukrainian, but if it was requested, it would be in English as well.
Too. Wow.
Yeah. And I looked forward to that. I enjoyed that.
Well, we're fortunate that Ron and Zach have taken over that church and maintained it.
Yeah.
Because it is beautiful.
And
to all of us, when we went in, Cornelia, and it was still in pristine shape.
Yes, yes.
I often wonder where that plywood, if that's plywood,
Well, that came
where
from
would that plywood have come from?
From the multiply.
From the multiply. There. It's beautiful wood, beautiful finish. So kudos to the carpenters who built that.
That would be Mike Onuskevich and Tadeusz Kowalczyshin. And my dad has the multiply plywood throughout the house, and they're all matched. So, the pattern repeats itself as it goes. But they maintained the church, and they kept it up as long as they could, until it ended up that it were just Dad and Mom.
Right.
And Mrs. Onuskevich as well. But we couldn't support the church anymore because the upkeep was too much.
Right.
And so... Yeah. When Mom and Dad were too old, Dad was in his 90s and Mom was 90, they went to Rainy Crest in Fort Francis where Iris was living.
Right.
And they spent the rest of their years there.
It's a nice piece of heritage, though, to leave here in history, Cornelia, that they did all of that.
Well, it was... We didn't have that many weddings. We had baptisms there and confirmations. But the Ukrainian community was very small at that time. And it just got smaller until there was nobody left. And I think in Nipigon there might be 5 of us left over.
Right.
And, I'd have to think hard who it would be. Now, we have Ukrainian people coming over. And they're refugees, and they're now in Nipigon. But I haven't met them. I don't know them at all.
Okay.
So, it's unfortunate, but this is where it is. I have no idea how Mom and Dad's family in Ukraine are doing, because we have contacts, but we haven't heard from them in 2 years. Mm-hmm. So, it was difficult while the Russians controlled Ukraine and Poland and other countries during the Cold War years. But, it was nice when it was opened up. Mom and Dad were alive to see that there was correspondence. People could travel back and forth. And right now, they would be devastated to know what was going on there. Yeah. But they wouldn't be surprised. Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised either. Mm-hmm. I have no use for Russians. Yeah. And unfortunately, Putin makes even those people... He lies to them, so they don't really know what's going on. Nothing's changed.
So was this after the war that your dad got interested in coming to Canada then?
Yes. He left the Ukraine, and he and Mom too, and they slept in ditches. They ran at night to get away from what was going on, but they feared the Russians the most. Okay. Dad said the German people were good to him, even though he was working as forced labor. He said he was working for farmers, and that was, you did your job, you were okay, but he said the Russians shot everybody, even their own people. So he said, you didn't worry about the Germans. They just take you back to where you ran from. But the Russians, he says, if they caught you, they'd shoot you. And
so they made their way to Holland then.
Yes, they
as
did.
A safe place.
It was a safe place at that time. There was nothing to eat in Holland. People were starving to death. But Mother was lucky. She ended up being a governess and a guest of wealthy Dutch people. And Dad, at that time, was rooming with another friend of his that he made in Holland. And they don't talk of those times with despair. They talk with gratitude. And my mother's fondest memory of the war years were being in Holland, and Dad's as well. He took correspondence course, and so did she, because they were preparing to go to Canada.
Right. Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, that's the part I wanted to talk to you about was the Ukraine part. Thank you very much.